We're live. Welcome in, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. It is, oh my God, Tuesday? Wednesday. What is today? Wednesday. My God, I don't even know my days, dude. Wednesday, February 22nd. It's a little bit after 2 o'clock Central. Today, I'm joined by the one and only Dan Ives, a fellow Penn Stater. I've been so excited to talk with Dan for the longest time. We finally hooked up. Dan, thank you so much for making the time to come on and speak with me today, man. I really appreciate
Oh,
it.
it's great to be here and with a fellow Penn Stater and just excited for the next hour. Just talk about all Tesla.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. We just came off of this conversation with Gavin Newsom and Elon Musk speaking about their sort of keeping or moving their headquarters really in California as it pertains to engineering and a lot of these things. What are sort of the thoughts that are going through your mind there after you sort of heard about this or saw this? Where's your head at with this?
I mean, my view is they have to court Tesla because the last thing that they could have is ultimately have Tesla and Musk further leave California for the likes of Texas. And I think it's similar to even what we saw with the Biden announcement, is that more and more Musk is going to be in the conversation rather than outside, especially where we're going.
Yeah. I do wonder, we were talking about this a little bit going live too, but I do see, it's interesting to watch how Elon, and I don't know if it's so much playing both sides or he's just being himself and trying to be as pragmatic as possible. It seems like, you have the Twitter free speech thing happening on one side, then you got the supercharger network, sort of this Tesla thing happening on the other side. Do you see it in a similar way where he's trying to sort of cater to both sides so that Tesla wins in the end? How do you view that?
Look, I think the reality is with the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a lot of incentives out there in terms of lithium build outs, battery technology. And right now, I think Tesla's in a position of strength. I think we're seeing with further build outs domestically. And look, if California is going to come with open arms, they're going to listen, whether it's tax incentives or others, to make sure that also they could diversify. You clearly have the Austin build out, which will be front and center next week at the Investor Day. But California ultimately, it's the roots of Tesla. It's a lot of their consumers. And I think that's a smart move.
How do you view some of the stuff that was going on like before with the Twitter days and stuff where Elon was taking a certain rhetoric on Twitter? He was kind of almost, one would argue was being a little bit divisive. It seems like some of this stuff with Biden and Gavin has maybe remediated that a little bit. Do you think that concern around maybe potential brand damage or taking a political side is now being alleviated with some of this stuff? How do you think about that?
Yeah, look, obviously we were vocal about it, because I think a lot of investors are frustrated at the time, but I think rhetoric's come down significantly. A lot of that overhang is now starting to dissipate. And you're even seeing Musk, I think, handle things differently on Twitter. And I think it's important because, now investors, and it's a big part of what we've seen with the stock, besides just the execution, what we've seen with the price cuts and demand. But I think you're starting to see, and I think we'll see more of it next week, a more mature Tesla, more focused on the vision. I think definitely read the room in terms of, as Musk saw. And I think most of that overhang is done.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there. It was definitely, I've been invested in the company since 2012, and the last sort of 6 months have been very challenging to watch as a retail investor because you're like, okay, I'm used to some of the craziness that I've seen, but it was never really this intense. And now that you think about how big Tesla has gotten and how big Elon Musk's popularity has gotten, it seemed like it was so amplified. But I agree with you. I think there were some lessons learned that Elon is either mindfully applying, or this is just the natural thing that happens over time as he's like, okay, well, this is, maybe I should come down a little bit and chill out on Twitter a little bit. But
and also to that point,
yeah,
I think, as we went through it, obviously I saw a lot from retail or on Twitter, a lot of criticism, like, well, why criticize Musk? Like, what? He's the richest person in the world. He's a modern day Albert Einstein, Thomas Edison, which I agree. Like, why criticize him? My view is just institutional investors were massively frustrated with what was going on. And even though maybe listeners, they're like, well, who cares day to day? But institutional investors are super important to the story. And that was something to be communicated, I think, as that was going on. And that, like I said, I think that was a huge part of the overhang, a significant part of the sell-off that we saw take place in the latter part of 2022.
Are you hearing a different, because you are, correct me if I'm wrong, Wedbush Securities, right? You're part of that team. Are you hearing some of that noise sort of alleviate? What are you hearing
Definitely.
around those circles? You are okay.
And I think there's institutional investors, they wouldn't look at the name October, November, because the last thing they want to do is have some sort of arbitrage, spider web exposure to Twitter. And now some of those same investors have bought the stock. Because now, I think you could start to look at back to the fundamental story of Tesla. Whereas a lot of that was noise that took away from, what I view as probably, along with Apple, two most transformational stories in the market.
Got it. One of the things I was hearing anecdotally in recent times after we saw the stock sort of drop to this $100 level, which in hindsight seems insane, but there was a lot of talk around how folks that weren't looking at the stock and the name before now became really it came on their radar because the value proposition was lining up better
Definitely.
with their expectations. Were you seeing that as well?
Oh,
With
I'd
what?
say 7 of every 10 institutional investors wasn't on the radar.
Wow.
Stock got so cheap. I mean, like when you start to get to levels, like let's just go back late December, you knew it was going to be a soft Q4 delivery number. Everyone thought, okay, why should this should start to trade toward a traditional automotive company, sub 100. Like at that point, and we talked about, I mean, the risk reward was probably, that was like one of the more unique times, maybe going back to sometimes in 2018, 2019, that we've seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that kept going through my mind because at some point I'm thinking about, obviously I'm a Tesla bull, you're a Tesla bull as well, obviously, but we're thinking about, okay, you start extrapolating out Tesla's potential here in the next, say, 1 to 3 years with the release of the Cybertruck, the full ramp of Berlin and Austin, and how additive that's going to be to Tesla's ability to generate net income. You're not even talking about the compact car, this $25,000 car that maybe we'll see during investor day. We're not even talking about the energy sector. Forget full self-driving, right? There's all these different things that are coming down the
4680
pike.
technology, exactly.
Exactly. And then you put these, like, you start layering these on. You're like, okay, at some point the price earnings ratio has to be attractive to everybody. Like,
But also I saw with Apple. I mean, if I go back years ago,
yeah,
there was a time Apple, like services business, we're going to give it no valuation, maybe 50 billion. Now
interesting.
I'd say that's worth a trillion, 1.2 trillion. It's a big part of what happens in these transformational stories. Microsoft going to give no credit to the cloud business. Part of why that stock was a 10 bagger because of the cloud business. So I think that's what happens in these transformational stories. But as we talk about, the haters hated it at 5 billion, 10 billion, a trillion, 600 billion. If they were, draft experts, they would have been negative on Brady coming out of the 2000 draft, 6th round.
They would have been hating on James Franklin, if I'm going to use the Penn State analogy, from the second he stepped on
They,
campus.
they, they, they would hate the Big Ten, even though in my opinion Big Ten's going to ultimately along with SEC really going to be the two power conferences out there.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, it's fascinating to see that. So it's interesting you say that about the sort of the parallel with Microsoft and Apple, and obviously you're somebody who's very well experienced and very
Or to
well.
look in
You
the
have a
video. Look in
yeah.
the video. Like I'm not going to give it any credit for AI. Now look, I'm
Mm,
just saying like that's when you talk about the next step of the Tesla story. It's about that. It's about the energy piece, the battery technology. It's about and I think you've started to see it this year because their margins give them the unique ability at the scale, cut prices, massively ramp demand.
were you surprised by that move that they made? that crazy price cut they did earlier this year? How?
I think it was a genius poker move that they needed to make because I think they recognized there was a price point if they cut to, and they were able to, and they could still do that with auto gross margins, north of 20. They could do that, and they knew demand. There was a level that would significantly accelerate demand. And that's what they needed to do. It's not just what's happening in China, but in the U.S. because this is, I think it's always dangerous when you're the leader in a market by miles. I think Intel is a good example of that. You could easily just price yourself out of things, get comfortable, feel like competition's not going to ultimately come and get you, and then look what happens, right? It goes back to like Ford 1919. What happened
Mm,
by 1927? So I think these are all historical, what I'd say, like, stories that I think Tesla, Musk, the board are very well aware of.
yeah, it's fascinating you bring those points, and I see Tesla bulls on the retail side too. Like they sort of use these type of I don't want to call them analogies, but like these data points that kind of describe how disruptive and innovative technology sort of transform the way not just that company functions in society, but also transforms the way the company creates value, and then how it transforms the way people view it as an investment opportunity. And it's so easy to see those parallels between energy and full self-driving and those things you sort of drew back to with Microsoft and Apple. Which one? So like if you're going to think about in the near term and say the next 1 to 3 years, which one do you think is going to be more which one should investors look out for more, energy or full self-driving, or do you see it differently? Like which one do you think it starts impacting the
See,
company
I
first?
see it. I see it differently. Not that
Okay,
it's right or wrong. It's just the way I
sure.
view it. I view that the battery technology, when it comes to 4680, and it comes to the scale, they're going to ultimately give them more flexibility from a margin perspective to go lower in price, much more global scale, and I think that's sort of the golden goose. So I don't view it like the
Mm,
street on a sum of the parts is going to then start to give some valuation to the energy business and then ultimately FSD. I think much more like 12, 18 months. It's really about scale, cutting price internally of basically cost to produce battery, and that's going to give them more flexibility from a price point. I
yeah.
think that's I think that's the linchpin because when I look at things like FSD, energy, sum of the parts, that's much more a 2025, 2030 story. What I'm focused on is 12 to 18 months, 24 months, what's key to the stock.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And essentially, is that that battery ramp and the ability to get the cost down is what really enables Tesla to flood the market with their products, right? That's really the mechanism.
And the margins.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go back to some of the issues that Detroit's having, specifically Ford, Stellantis, and
Yeah. I
others,
want to pick your brain on
I
that
think
too. God.
what's the issue? Because now all of a sudden it's like streets. Okay, what are margins on the EV business? When are you going to get the profitability? Look, personally, I think that's the wrong way to view it. For especially for GM, I think you have to have a longer view. You can't view the ICE business like the EV business, but it shows these companies are held to such a micro focus on margins that it gives them less flexibility what they can do. And Tesla is more in a position of strength because of where they are and because of the scale.
Were you surprised by Ford deciding to break out their Model E and their ICE business as a public company starting in Q1? How do you interpret that from Ford?
I think it's a double-edged sword. I think you could argue you want to give I like it in the fact that you want to give investors some metrics to value that business and almost some of the parts here. Because I'd argue like GM is really the same concept,
Yeah.
but you can put the genie back in the bottle. Once you do that, you now there's more transparency, but
Secrets
now
out.
you have but now you have to produce. Now
Yeah.
Ford, because the F-150 being such a franchise vehicle, I think that's a super smart move. But look, it goes back to like the margin structure and everything else. That's going to be a tightrope for these companies to walk. GM clearly in the best position because of Ultium. Ford, be from a battery perspective, more of an uphill battle.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned those two because I've been really starting to track those two companies a little bit more closely because one of my as a retail investor in Tesla, the one thesis I have is that it's going to be extremely difficult for the competition to really catch up to where they're at, which is going to give Tesla the ability to essentially dictate their own TAM. They're basically going to enter. It's just going to be a free for all, and Tesla's going to be like, "Well, I got everything I need to take over
But
this
it's
thing,"
not
and
a
there's going to
zero
be no one
sum
close.
game. But it's not a zero
Exactly.
sum game. Like
Yeah.
I feel like and this is like my it's my view, right?
Sure.
Not that it's right or wrong. Sometimes I feel like there's investors like you could only invest in Tesla for EV,
Mm.
and it's almost like if you put pepperoni on the pizza, you're not a pizza lover. It's like if you look at any other name,
Yeah.
you
Unless you put pineapple.
and it's funny. There are people that are super bullish on pineapple and I was in Hawaii a few weeks ago, and I had a pineapple pizza slice. Pretty good, pretty good. I
Okay.
no, but I view like GM. I think GM is going to be, I believe, a massive winner relative to just having success in EV, and that's a stock that could re-rate 40, 50%. I think Lucid's another one that's going to have more and more success. Tesla's going to be the clear leader, but it just goes back to like if you want to play some of the China pure plays, like Neo's our favorite there. But that's our view. Like I'm not a believer like Tesla has been our main way to play EVs, but I
Mm.
believe in this massive transformation, biggest transformation to the auto industry since 1950s. There are other basket ways to play it along with Tesla.
That's an interesting way of thinking about it. Thank you for sort of bringing me up to speed to it. So then, if you're sort of saying going more into the future, are you envisioning how are you viewing the car market long term? Do you think it's 100% EV by 2035 and it's 150 million units a year? Like what kind of walk me through how you're thinking about it long term?
I mean, look, we've talked like the green tidal wave, and obviously some like it, some don't. But I
Yeah.
mean, our view, like you're going to get to a point where instead of you know one of every 10 or point 0.2 of every 10 cars is EV, we're going to get to a point where 6 or 7 of every 10 cars is EV. Vast majority of those are going to be Teslas, but you're going to have a lot of winners from the European players to what I view as some of the Detroit stalwarts like GM.
Mm.
And I think the difference is that from an investor perspective, it's going to be viewed more as disruptive tech rather than traditional autos.
Mm.
And that's always been my view. Like my view is Tesla is a disruptive technology company. It shouldn't trade like a Toyota.
100%.
So, but I think what's going to happen is more and more that philosophy is going to come to the auto market in terms of from a Wall Street perspective. That's what happened. I mean, if you look what happened, like hardware going to software multiples used to trade on traditional PE, like EV to EBITDA, and then once it became more disruptive, especially going back to 2002, 2003, that's where it all changed.
Got it. Yeah, that's fascinating to think through. How do you think about So if I were to take, we have the Teslas and the Lucids, right, that are pure EV plays, ground up, designed from the very beginning to manufacture strictly EVs, and they don't really have what I call a bunch of baggage with them, with the
Sure, sure.
legacy car
Like
business.
legacy, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So how do you think like companies like GM and Ford could be at a risk in the next 5 to 10 years that if the transition isn't quick, it's going to be, for example, it's going to be a lot harder for GM to produce an EV profitably long term when they have so many assets and so many things tied to the company that theoretically, as the EV gets taken up more and more adopted, the other side of the business should depreciate in value massively versus the rest of it, right? Because, or do you think about it differently?
See, I view it differently. Like I view
Okay.
it that for GM, if you start to convert 10, 15% of their base, 7 million vehicles per year, to EV, that value and the software value in those cars
Offset.
is going to be magnitudes more than the value of the company today. Now, now others, they'll disagree and they'll be like, ICE weighs it down, like they can't do it profitably. But my view is in terms of what they're doing with Ultium and in terms of their ability to monetize, I think that's look, that was a huge part of our like Microsoft when Nadella took over cloud re-rating story. But at the time, people thought like we were drinking really good or bad alcohol with that thesis. You see what I'm saying? Like when you go through it, it's hard because you think of these companies one way.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I'm curious to see. I am really curious to see what I'm truly excited for is that Q1 earnings report from Ford when they break out the two businesses. Because, and you tell me if I'm thinking about this incorrectly, because that's going to be almost like a proxy for what legacy auto, say Ford is the only one for the next few quarters that's breaking these two businesses out. It's going to be a proxy to understand what sort of challenges legacy auto is going to be facing in this transition. Because Ford decides to be the first one to open, like you said, open the floodgates. You're kind of letting the genie out of the bottle, and now you're almost using the fact that you're being so transparent as a tool to light a fire under everybody that works there. Because like, hey, everybody knows, everybody knows what's going on now, right? So I'm curious to see how that dynamic's going to play out and what sort of nuggets we're going to get out of that story and apply it to different car makers as
But
well.
I do think like GM's done it better. In other words, like
Okay.
The way that GM's done it is like laid it out, built out, have the factories that they've built out, secured supply. Now
Mm,
you're going to roll out the models.
mm,
Ford, because of the F-150, is unique because it's such a franchise vehicle, like 9K per year.
mm.
But but you're right. Like, look, it comes with inherent. There's cultural issues, like engineer, right? That for companies the last 100 years, right, working on ice, and there's challenges, but I view it as massive opportunities. I think that's
Sure.
the broader thing. Like you talk about going back to Tesla. Tesla's revolutionized how other auto companies operate,
So true.
and the only other companies that I've seen, it's like what Apple's done, what Amazon's done. I think when NVIDIA's done, and obviously there's other examples, but
Yeah.
you count on one or two hands.
Yeah, it's definitely a fact. It's just as an investor in the on the sort of on this side of the industry, on the auto industry, and watching this thing unfold with, and I've been following it with such interest. It's just such an interesting, fascinating time. It's truly, to your point,
It's
it's a
history.
transformation. It is
It's
history.
watching. No,
Yeah,
it's watching history,
yeah,
but we're living it.
yeah,
And I think that's the fascinating thing. But it goes back to like look like in terms of like Tesla haters so emotional and it's like it goes back to like there were so many investors that thought Apple was going to be the next BlackBerry.
yeah,
It was just a phone. It was financial crisis comes in '09, iPhones launch in '07. People be like, dude, that's it. It's like this is the next BlackBerry. So I think it just goes back to like there's some investors that are more visionary and they could see through, and others that are, yeah. But then again, like that's what makes a market, bull and bear.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. Before we start getting into Investor Day, someone in the comments wants to know where you got that jacket because they want to get one too. Where'd you get that thing?
Oh, this one, I got this at Aviator Nation in Austin.
Oh, sick! That's awesome. Right here.
Yeah.
That's great. Look, there's the comment from Charles. Seriously, ask him where he got it. Would be so pure if it was actually vintage. LOL.
Yeah, and I like wearing funky stuff, and
Yeah.
it's just how I've always sort of just keep it fun, and look, it just makes it
You're just
more
looking fly,
instant.
Dan. You're just looking fly, bro. Come on now. It's awesome. There was a picture of you on Twitter. I remember there was like shoes. You were wearing this suit with these sick shoes. I forget when I saw the picture. I'm like, dude, Dan's got style, bro. He's confident. I
Oh,
love it.
I haven't worn leather shoes since like a long time. I mean, yeah, but
Okay.
I think but also it goes more to my personality. As many like that focus, like on Twitter, like I love just interacting with everyone, like whether they
Yeah.
criticize or like what I say. I just do like enjoy it. And like, look, I think the work that you do, Nash, obviously Gerber, everyone, and obviously Gary. It's like just fascinating to watch.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that very much. And speaking about that too, let's also let people know that next week on Wednesday on March 1st for Investor Day. If you've been following me, you probably already know this is happening, but it's one of the things I haven't announced yet. But I guess I'll announce it now. We have a panel next week on Wednesday, March 1st, and we're going to be hosting a sort of an all-day coverage thing at Clive Bar on Rainey Street. And we're going to have a panel sometime in the evening. And then, Dan, if you're still up for it, you're going to be on the panel.
Yeah,
And it's going
one
to
way
be
or
awesome.
another, I'll be on the panel.
Hell yeah. It's going to be super fun. So make sure you come say hi at Clive. I'll be there all day. Dan will be there either, part of the day or definitely in the evening on the panel. It's going to be super, super fun. And there'll be others as well. It will be announced later today or tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. Let's talk Investor Day, man. So what are you thinking? What do you expect from this thing?
I think I say four things, like what I'm hoping for. I think one's capacity, where I think they talk about Mexico, potentially Indonesia, just in terms of from a scale. I think that's going to be definitely front and center. I think an update on the 4680 from a production perspective, and also a battery day type almost follow up in terms of giving some maybe like economics around battery technology at Tesla. I think that's something that would be super important to the story because it goes back to the whole. Right now, it's about margins, battery tech, and scale. And I think unit economics to kind of show, even to compare and contrast like a China, and of course, being at Austin, I think they're going to be a big focus on some of the plans in Austin, what they're going to be doing there, some of the potential on the lithium production side. And then as you hinted, I think it's the roadmap on other models. And I think it's announcing the roadmap for a sub 30K car.
Yeah, I did a video yesterday where I try to like think about. I don't even know if this thing's going to get announced next week, but if when Tesla decides to announce this what a compact car, this less than $30,000 car, whatever you want price you want to put on it. But if you really think about the economics of owning a car at that level, that's an EV that has basically no maintenance, is much cheaper to operate than a gas car because of its electric. It's going to be sold at million units per year because it's going to be much easier to build versus the 3 and the Y. And then you think about the potential if even if it doesn't have full self-driving, and say they figure out how to get it between $25,000 and $30,000 out the door. That's a $250 to $350 lease price with zero down, and you get a Tesla, no less, and you get access to the supercharger network. You get access to this infotainment system, right? It's completely mind blowing. And so and I'm trying to temper my expectations because that to me seems like it's going to break the auto industry completely. Because if you think about that down market, especially in the United States, it doesn't seem well served. You got the Toyota Corolla, you got the Kia Rio, you got Nissan Sentra, and all of a sudden you have this thing. It's going to break everything. Am I crazy thinking about it this
But
way?
look, but let's just go back to Apple.
Yeah.
they Samsung, everyone, Chinese competitor, they tried to come at them, but Apple was able to do it at price points comparable, and ultimately, especially with monthly payments and everything else, palpable. And you get the whole ecosystem. That these are the when you're on top of the mountain, you can scale, and you got the margins to do it, and that's important in terms of where they are now.
Do you think this point right here is still not well understood by most of Wall Street?
It's not.
That's
I'm
mind-blowing to
telling.
me.
I mean, it's not well understood, and that's why I think like this quarter, the most important thing. A lot of times, like when companies report, right? It's like you know, revenue, EPS, got it. It was all about margin. It was about what the margins could be when they cut prices 15, 20%. That that was it. Like as the institutional investor, that changed the whole story. It changed. I think it changed the long term vision when you start to even model it out over the coming years. Because the whole issue, and obviously, like there's many on here that everyone's like so smart and so so opinionated one way or another on Tesla. When you have 55, 60, 70K, you're never scaling to 5, 6, 7 million units. It's nit, right? Like you're gonna go like max what 2.5 million units, 3 million
Yep.
units.
Yep.
When you start to get to these price points, that's the dream scenario.
Yeah. And then Q1 then, so Q1 is even going to be more monumental, right? Because you have all these price decreases technically, well, it should be baked in now into the margins that they're going to release probably sometime in April or yes, late April probably is when their earnings report's going to be. So the attention on that number is probably going to be insane. And if they can be, so like in your head, where do you think that number is going to be at?
Well,
20%,
well, I
18%?
think,
Like how do you
yeah,
think?
I
Yeah.
think the line in the sand is 20%. I mean
Yeah.
that's sort of the line in the sand that, from a street bogey perspective, that's like very important psychologically.
Mm.
Um, I think the other thing that everyone's paying attention to is like maniacal focus on the China numbers to see what ultimately happens with demand at these price points. Like, okay, like does backlog start to be? I mean, that's really going to be a big focus. Do they have to cut prices more? Because then that would ultimately accelerate a little of the bear argument. Like, okay, like, well, where does it go? Do they just have to keep price? You get into a price war. A price war, no one wins. So that's why like there's such a maniacal focus on. Everyone knows like 2x demand over production, but now I think it's key in the month of March to see what happens with overall demand. Look, I mean, like we run these surveys in China, okay, with EV buyers, and we spin them out to give us a sense of like how important price cuts have been. And all of our survey work showed like, they nailed it in terms of the price points. It swayed 3 of every 4 consumers that we've polled.
Well.
And now it's about going forward.
Wow. Yeah, one of the things that I always struggle with, and is, either I don't have the resources or I'm just a dummy because I don't know how to research, but I always feel blind to what's going on in China because it seems like it's tough for me. Troy and Gary do a really good job. You did, I know
Yeah,
you tweeted out your survey.
Troy's.
Yeah.
Troy's the goat, right?
He is
I
the
mean, in
goat.
terms of,
He totally is the goat, and he does a great job of just being as objective as humanly possible about the data that he sees. He doesn't sway one way or the other. But it does sound like from the surveying you've done that the price decreases that happened in January have been effective. How does that? One of the things that's been circling around, it seems like, has been this sort of Tesla Model 3 that's freaking barreling down the street, and I'm guessing somebody's driving like a maniac. Do you think that's a negative thing that's going to happen? That's going to impact Tesla long term in China? How do you think about stuff like that?
well, first of all, with all these things, like you gotta wait to see what the real stories are, right? Like
Yeah.
you gotta get the facts. But look, it's one where, I mean, there's obviously a super amount of scrutiny, but if you look in China, demand, we believe demand's held up extremely well. Now, we'll look at the February, most of that's exported to Europe, right? So I just think it's not necessarily apples to apples. March, I'd expect a pretty significant ramp, and then it gives you some sense of like what this is going to look like for the year globally in this macro, because it goes back to like last year, right? Like you grew 40% where others were declining, so it's a relative game.
How do you view the Chinese economy and like Tesla's success within that context? Because one of the things I've been hearing is, there was a fear about a housing bubble, that issues, the way the government was running things. How do you view the Chinese economy and Tesla's success within that context?
Yeah, well, clearly, I mean, it hit a major soft patch. Uh, we've seen there over the last 6 months. China is so key to just the global economy, but especially Tesla. But look, post lockdown and COVID changes, you are seeing a resurgence in China, right? I
Good.
mean, we're there a few times a year and do a lot of work when we're there, and I just believe that I'm not a doomsday believer, right? There was like, I think with all these, you could extrapolate data points. I think the thing is, we go through this near term soft patch. What does it look like on the other side?
Yeah. Yeah, I've started to see that too. I can't tell you the amount of YouTube videos I saw pop up on my feed a couple months ago that were just projecting China to basically be in a pile of rubble in 4 months, and you have folks like Peter Zeihan,
It's
like, hey, I respect them, but it's like this thing's gonna collapse.
But look, it just goes back to like I've been an analyst on Wall Street was since late '90s. Like, how many times have I seen like world's ending, China's invading Taiwan, Europe debt crisis, Greece isn't good. I mean, we could go financial crisis. I mean, look, many of these people, if they won the lotto, they complain about taxes. Like, it's what makes a market. There's some people, they were negative on NASDAQ at 4,000, hated it at 10, despised it at 15. So I don't know, man. You know what I mean? It's just like, I think it just depends which side you are in terms of just your viewpoint. I mean, clearly, like, we've been more perma bullish, like in terms of tech the last 20 years. But look, there's people on the other side, right? Like they walk around conspiracy theory it out.
It's fun to listen to, at least.
Look,
And
look, and I ironically, like a lot, I listen because like, especially some of the macro, like so smart, right? But
Mm.
I mean, I think sometimes it's very easy to like not see the forest through the trees.
Mm, I see. Yeah, I do wonder too, and you tell me if I'm thinking about this incorrectly. Even in a scenario, if I think about, the big discussion, at least stateside, has been around sort of how the Fed is handling the interest rate hike and a potential, forced we're gonna have to be in this situation where we're gonna do a lot more harm than good, and you contrast that to some of the metrics that are coming out. Unusual Whales is a Twitter account that kind of lists out some
Yeah,
top
sure,
line
sure,
metrics
sure,
from different
sure.
places. Talking about the economy, top a lot of debt. People are paying a lot for cars, so on and so forth. But it does seem like even if in an environment there are recessionary forces in play, it does seem like companies that are the most efficient, the leanest, who have the right culture and can generate cash through those recessions ultimately end up winning. And I can't help but think about, okay, which companies fit that bill the best, and Tesla keeps coming back to mind, right? Do you think
But
about that
that's,
in the same way?
I mean, as someone that was an analyst during the bubble and burst, the strong that whether the Oracles, the S8 in '03, like you look at where Salesforce was, where they are now. I go back to Apple, Meta, Amazon. I mean, look, like downturns, you cut costs, you navigate, and ultimately it leads to the next cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Make,
that's, and it just goes back to, and I think that's why many were just very wrongly positioned going into this year, using the 2022 playbook for 2023. And look, Fed, like, I mean, like Volcker, like if you go back, like, it was almost like you gotta like cut the snake's head off, which is inflation, and then take it and show it to everyone. So the point is that you gotta talk hard. Maybe you have another 25 bip hike, but we're in the seventh and a half inning, eighth, ninth.
mm.
I mean, the point is like that's the important thing is we're getting to the end of this cycle.
Got it. No, that's very helpful to think through. Tesla Energy, that might be another thing that gets covered during this investor day, if I can bring it back to that. It looks like that part of the business is starting to get a lot more love, not just from Tesla, but from some analysts, at least retail, that are really paying attention to this Megapack 2 XL. Tesla sort of did that video where they think they're going to be able to do 10,000 units a year or so.
Yep.
There is a lot of talk about how profitable that thing could be, because if you really think about it, it's just a cabinet filled with batteries that they're selling at God knows what margin. How do you think about that side of the business for Tesla?
No, I think that the street assigns basically no value to that business today. So that's one as you look out, and that's huge potential as they scale it. I think them breaking out margins further on that business would actually be a positive
Mm,
because it goes back to like with Amazon, you never got credit with AWS, so you broke it out and you broke out the margins, and that was a big part of the massive re-rating in Amazon. For Apple, it was services. So a lot of times, like you have to be a little more granular when you break out some of these businesses, provide some margin detail, and that's something that I think is important to the next leg of that stool.
got it. Yeah, I think what's interesting, if I look at Tesla's statement of operations, and you look at sort of their revenue and cost of revenues for the energy line, it looks like they're coming in at about 12%. I think was Q4. How much they were, but
Like
it's
low
still.
teams, yeah.
Yeah, but it was still on a low revenue base. I think it was like 1.3 billion or something. So the total percentage of the business is still tiny. But I
Well,
wonder how much the.
that could scale at 20%, 25. When you start to
That's kind
get
of what I'm thinking. Yeah,
2.5, 3 billion, that margin should be a two in front of it.
yeah. It's going to be quite wild to watch, and I think that one is going to be. I think a lot of retail thinks that's like the sleeping giant, and I think it sounds like you do as well. Obviously, that energy is
I
going to
mean,
be
but yeah, I wouldn't say
long
it's
term.
sleeping. I'd
Yeah,
say like Wall Street. Now I know people talking like, "Oh, Wall Street, who cares?" Okay, I'm just telling you like what it. You know, Wall Street is not going to give it full credit, but it's incremental credit that they could start to give as you give out more granularity.
got it. So that granularity from Tesla will help Wall Street model that out into the future, because they'll actually know
That's
how to think
that's
about it.
the key. Look, it goes back
Yeah.
to your Ford. That's why Ford's doing it
Mm.
to give more granularity and ultimately some of the parts the valuation.
Mm, interesting. Okay, that's really helpful to think about. Um, Full self driving. So there's been so much talk about this damn thing. I've been a beta tester for over 2 years now. I had it while I was at the company. I had one of the earliest versions before it like was rolled out to the public, and I've seen this thing be transformed from a barely useful thing that would try to kill you at every turn to something that's legitimately useful nowadays. How do you think about that part of the business? How do you model it? What would Wall Street need to see? Kind of give me your thoughts around that. We'll turn into a
I
conversation.
mean, look, it's been a black eye, right? Which is not, everyone knows that in terms of it's more scrutinized company in the world. The FSD issues and obviously investigation now. I think they were proactive with the software updates. You guys see more and more of that. Look, there has to be, I think, more resolution here, and to get past this chapter to then start to get to a point where investors give it credit. I think we're in one of those holding patterns where, it's right now, at least in the eyes of Wall Street, it's viewed as more of a overhang in terms of a lot of the tragic stuff that we've seen, rather than something where you can give it credit. Yeah, I believe we're going to get there, but they got to get over this hurdle. And I do think it was a good first step with some of the OTA updates.
Got it. Yeah, the one thing that was interesting about the sort of this NHTSA, I'll give it a recall quote unquote because it was just a software update. It's going to be
Yeah,
solvable
yeah, it's
extremely
OTA.
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was funny because the notes they were using for the recall, it's like, okay, so that's literally how every person drives. It's like
Of course.
it was so funny, but it makes sense. The humans driving the system, so we should recall. Anyway, but I do wonder. That was encouraging for me to see because it does seem like at least NHTSA. One of the fears people have is that NHTSA is going to be too heavy-handed. They're going to be too restrictive. They're going to be too. They're going to slow down Tesla's progress. This thing's not going to come to fruition quickly. But it seems like it's the opposite.
I'm not in that camp yet.
Yeah, they seem to be very reasonable, and because if what they would have done if it really was in their eyes dangerous, wouldn't they have shut it down by now or like been a lot more tough to work with?
It goes back to like conspiracy theorists, like maybe smoke and
Me.
mirror, like okay, somewhere. But you see, I'm saying like there's somewhere like in between. I think we're starting to get maybe more in the middle, which I think is a positive.
Great. That's a great way of thinking about it,
But
actually.
but also just like let's just say like Coinbase. Okay, I'm just giving an example. For that stock to work, you need more regulators to be involved. That ultimately gives investors more comfort, especially to them moving forward. I feel like it's the same thing with FSD.
Makes sense. So it's kind of like the closer we get to where regulators and Tesla and the investing community are all kind of on the same page, and they can all see the forest from the trees and where this is eventually going. This is what's truly going to allow the not the software to just be completed, but for investors to be able to give a proper valuation to the business.
But it's almost like with all these things, like when Musk got shunned at the White House invite, and
Yeah,
you now want to see Musk more collaborating with the administration, Biden administration,
and
with
you're seeing
Secret
it.
Service. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Newsom, California, you want to see that. Like I like that's bullish. That's a positive for the story, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. It shows that there's a level of I couldn't agree more. Like today's meeting was quick and it seemed like if I'm
But
going
it's
to use the Gavin
symbolic.
Newsom, it's super symbolic. Exactly. Especially with all the noise and craziness that quote unquote craziness that has been happening around the story.
Totally.
Again, it's like you had this sort of story around Elon Musk, enemy number one of the Democratic Party. This is just the visions that I had in my head. And it's
Sure.
like, hey, everybody on the left hates him. Nobody in California is going to buy the car. This dude is a crazy right wing nut. And then you have a 10-minute video with Gavin Newsom giving Elon props and like basically saying, thank you so much for everything you've done. I'm so happy you're here in California. And Elon's like, thank you very much. And they shake hands. That seems
Look,
good.
if you go back to the last 45 days or 60 days, it's
Yeah.
like sold stock, said, okay, I'm done. Like cut prices, demand's gone. Conference call, probably in my opinion, probably best conference call in the last 2 years. Like hand holding in terms of Biden administration, in terms of state of California, investor day, like less noise on Twitter. I mean, stock gone from
Cybertruck's coming
100
out.
to 2. Stock's gone from 100 to 200. That's not in a choppy-ish market.
Yeah. And I do see Gary Black, I know you know well. He's been, you and him do a very good job on Twitter, really helping investors see how you guys are thinking about the story. And the one thing I keep seeing, it's like these catalysts that are starting to stack up. They're just catalyst
No,
after
I know.
catalyst after catalyst. It seems
Okay,
it's
and Gary and also Gary is like just like level-headed,
yeah,
weighs things out in ways that like and I think he's getting like which he should be getting like much like just huge props in terms of like just how well he understands the story.
for sure, for sure. Do you think and so maybe we'll do let me pick your brain on one more thing, and then we'll do some Q&A with the community.
Yeah,
You cool with
sure,
that? Yeah,
definitely.
awesome. Yeah. And so producer wife, go ahead and prompt that for the community, and we'll pull in some questions for Dan. So Tesla has what was really fascinating about this Q4 call, which I agree with you was one of their best in a long time, was that they had they had a stated target of about 1.8 million cars shipped in 2023, and then Elon literally 2 minutes later he desandbags it and is like, "You will probably do 2 million."
Yeah, but
during the
no,
call.
but the thing is, but that was the whole thing last year. Like when they had that whole 50% number out there, and like they never
Yeah,
look. Those are like bad bogeys. Like that's why like in earnings season, what you're seeing across tech is just like cut numbers, sandbag, give numbers you could hit, instead of street constantly cut and cut and cut and cut. So I think it was like when they gave the 1.8, that was really important as just a hittable number.
gotcha. So it was really about setting a proper expectations for the market so they don't get freaking slapped across the face.
Because otherwise, as an investor, institution, like the street's gonna have to bring it down. Numbers gonna get cut. Deliveries, and that doesn't serve anyone good.
Yeah. So what do you think? Do you think that 1.8 is achievable? Where do you have it
I
in your
think
head?
1.8 is like I think 1.8 is like it's like a 15, 20 foot jump shot.
Mm,
Like in other words, like it's not like
it's
a
makeable.
3-pointer fade away. You see, that's how I sort of view 1.8.
Got it. Yeah, I view it the same way because if you look at sort of Q4's, if you look at Q4's production numbers, I think they had 440 for the quarter, and it implies a 1.8 number in 2023 means that they increased their production rate by like not even 5%, and they deliver every car they produce. That seems doable, you
Look,
know?
Model Ys got sold out in the U.S. I mean, look, the point is like, could there be black swan, exogenous factors?
Of
Of
course.
course, supply chain it. But I'm just saying, like everything else equal, I think 1.8 is like it's a very realistic number.
Yeah. It's just the biggest question is going to be what the margins will be at that 1.8, and I think that's where I think you
Well,
and I, yeah,
that's like
that's it.
that's the golden goose.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch, man. I don't know about you, but I feel like this Q1 earnings report, like I haven't been looking more forward to a report in a long time than this Q1 that's going to be coming out because it's just there's so many exciting developments, and part of me says part of me says that they have the potential to surprise the margin on the upside because of how Berlin and Austin, you think about their Q4 results, they had that price decrease towards the end of the quarter. So you're not going to have a lot of that pricing dynamic in that 25% margin they reported with the credits. A lot of that's going to be, you're going to take a hit on that in Q1. But then you have Berlin and Austin that should be ramped up quite a bit more. You're going to have a China factory and a Fremont factory that outside of them being closed for the new year and the COVID
Yep.
thing, they should be running at full bore. You have a full pipeline of cars that you've sort of undid the way for 2 quarters. That with your price increase, you sort of just like flooded the market with these cars. It's somewhat in the United States and in Europe. It seems like there's a lot of economies of scale at play in Q1 that might surprise on the upside. Am I thinking about it too bullish? What
No,
do you
I
think
think
about
it.
that
But
statement?
look, and there's always offsets, but I think that's like the bull scenario, right? Like and definitely more positive. And I think next week's important in terms of laying everything out.
Okay, fair enough. Awesome. All right, should we do some Q&A, Dan? So let's see
Yeah,
what the people have
definitely.
to say. Awesome. And then we'll
Awesome.
maybe after we do some Q&A, we'll maybe talk Penn State football for a few minutes.
Or college football, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. All right, Zeke the Terrible. Thank you very much. Ask Dan what inning of the EV story we're in. Top of the fifth. Where do you
Third.
think we're at? Third
I
inning.
think bottom. I think bottom third.
We're still early. Let me ask you this: where do you see BYD in this whole thing?
I think they're a major player in China in terms of from the scale. I mean, like hugely positive on everything they're doing. I just think I like Neo more as my China play than BYD, just because some of the innovation going on. I view it almost Lucid-ish like in terms of like if I was going to play China outside Tesla, I'd rather play with Neo.
There is a question here, like I just mentioned, BYD and producer wife just brought this up. What are Dan's thoughts on BYD potentially fibbing sales numbers? There was a tweet earlier, I think yesterday or today. There was like a guy in his used sales lot that was saying that they're somehow selling cars to used car sales lots, and that's how they're like messing up their sales figures. Do you think there's any merit to that?
Yeah, I don't know. I
Yeah.
couldn't comment there.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, breakfast. All right, let's do the breakfast pizza. What a great name, by the way. Is Dan bullish on Palantir? How do you think
Well,
about
yeah, I
Palantir?
mean, because my view, I mean, Palantir, I think was very bumpy, right, coming out. I mean, just given their background, the government, and trying to commercialize, and we saw that since the IPO. I think they're finally getting their footing. I
Okay.
mean, and I think they have a secret sauce that's unique, especially when it comes to commercializing that. And obviously, we talked to a lot of enterprise players, and my view is very positive in terms of what Palantir could do in terms of scale. Now it's about execution. And, and obviously a lot of this AI craze, which I don't view as a hype cycle. I view what's happened to AI is much more real in terms of Microsoft Chat, GPT, and everything else.
Yeah, that's been a space that I've been just so fascinated by. I got access to the Bing beta thing, like the new
Oh,
Bing or
right.
whatever. It's sick, dude. Like I
Oh,
can
yeah.
literally go. It's sick. I can go on a on a earnings report and be like, "Can you summarize this and compare it to this and compare it to this link?" And then it like spits it out for me. I'm like, okay, this is nice. It's
No,
wild.
but it goes back to this world we're living in, whether we're talking about Tesla, talking about AI, talking about some of the cybersecurity. I mean, it's it's a fourth industrial revolution that's playing out despite the macro.
Real quick on the Palantir story, because that's been something I've been trying to follow, and it's the one thing I'm still struggling with. Truly, is like, will they be able to scale outside of government with the same type of margins that they would in like so? For example, in government right now, most of their business is government related contracts. Q4 was just their first profitable quarter. They really
Yep.
had to work to get there, but I'm guessing once they go commercial, their margins
But
should be
it's
a lot
always
cheaper. How do you think
Yeah,
about
but
that?
it's always hard. Any company like this that's just massively successful and has such a moat within federal that you're going to duplicate that exact success in commercial, which is a lot more competitive. So I view it as an apples to oranges comparison. But
Okay.
like, look, but that's a common issue that companies that have been very successful in federal, it's a different game when you get into commercial.
Do you think Palantir is well suited to succeed on the commercial side?
Look, I think Palantir is well positioned on the commercial side. It's really more of an execution story.
I see.
And I think for them, that's why I think this quarter was like a big step in the right direction.
Got it. Makes sense. All right. Next question. Let's see what we got. From Alex, question: after the last tranche, Elon isn't getting paid, compensated anymore for the master plan part 3. Is Elon still the best leader for executing that plan? Ooh, interesting question. How do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, he's hearts and lungs of Tesla, right? No different than my view of Jobs with Apple and now Cook. But Musk, I mean, there's been a lot of issues on the pay package. He he's so he's so key to the Tesla story. I think the reason the pay package is obviously, second richest person in the world, it's that you want to send a signal to investors that there's not going to be any succession plan or any worries like that. Because look, as we've seen even over the last 6 months, He's a key part of the premium to the stock. When the whole Twitter situation happened, that was why that premium got taken out. Now it's back.
Yeah. Yeah. The way I think about Elon and Tesla is like long term, I feel like Tesla is still fine because there's they'll get the battery up, maybe not as quick. The bot will probably not come out. Like think about these long-term visionary goals that Elon has. But then the stock, I think, will take a huge discount, at least in the near to short term, if for some reason he wasn't part of the story. That's how I think about Elon, and I think it speaks much more to his unique ability as a leader, and he's just so good at what he does. I think especially for setting a vision long term. That why wouldn't you want him to be part of that story? It's like he's your best player. It's like having Michael Jordan and not having him on the floor. It's kind of wild.
Exactly. No, that's like, oh, you know what? Give me those 90 Bulls. Yeah, I'll take out Jordan.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? Brady. Yeah, we don't really need him with the Patriots. I'm saying it's the same. Jeter. Yeah, we don't need him as a shortstop for the Yankees. It's same concept.
Yeah. Fascinating. Let's do a couple more. Let's bring up the next one. From Haruken, longtime supporter of the channel. Thank you so much for the question. Dan, how do you feel about Ross Gerber running for Tesla's board? Yeah.
Look, Gerber I know well. Huge fan of Gerber. And I think it's important, like I think him running for the board, and I think he's also raising a lot of great issues. Like I think that's the important thing is that, we're all talking about moving forward, about moving the story forward. And I think Gerber's dialed into a lot of the issues the street's focused on. And I think, many support him.
I think from my end, I actually had Alexandra Mertz on my channel. Was it yesterday or 2 days ago? I can't even remember anymore. My days are like blurred together. The conclusion that I've come to, and again, I know Ross, like he's been on my channel. I don't know him well, but I've talked to him. Nice guy. He also plays guitar. I play guitar, so I have a hard time not liking the guy. Okay. But I do think, I do wonder, I think the issues he raises are important to listen to. My thing is like, I'm not really sure, like if I'm sitting as retail, right? I'm not really sure if that warrants a board seat. I do think that the issues should be looked at objectively, and Tesla should at least address them in some way and say, yep, this one's a priority, this one isn't.
And more independence on the board.
Okay.
Like more, like I think that's it. I just bringing in more board members is not a bad thing.
Okay. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see play out. I think that's going to be one of the dynamics we might see this year come there, because the proxies come out soon, right? Are the proxies out yet? I don't even know. Okay.
Oh no, they'll come out soon.
Yeah, so it's fascinating to watch. Great question, Hadouken. Thank you so much. This one's such an interesting question because I know there's a lot of division between the community, so it's always interesting to hear the take on this. Let's do the next one, and then we'll do one more. Jared, question: What are the odds? What are the odds that they don't announce a $25,000 vehicle on Investor Day?
Look, I think I'd be surprised if they don't officially announce it, lay some vision out for getting to a sub 30K vehicle. I mean, look, the roadmap's important for investors, retail, institutional, Tesla community to understand. Everyone knows about Cybertruck, but you want to understand what the next 2-3 years looks like in terms of from models getting rolled out.
What would be a surprise for you if they do unveil at this meeting? Like, what would be like, holy crap, I didn't expect them to do that, but they did it. What goes through your mind?
A surprise would be if they don't give a roadmap on models. Like it's just like a 3-year roadmap. That would surprise me.
Got it. So like understanding when Cybertruck is going to come off the line, when this compact car is being planned to be unveiled, and where maybe like a van style vehicle, kind of that sort of.
Or is there some sort of SUV like non-Cybertruck, like more Tesla-ish SUV,
like a Tahoe
coming out? Like, yeah, exactly, like a Rivian. Like because look, competition's coming. Like everyone knows that, right? All different models, all different shapes and sizes of cars. So I think it would be good for them to at least come out with a roadmap, at least for the next, call it 2 to 3 years.
Got it. Okay. All right, let's do one more, and then we'll do some Penn State football and wrap this sucker up. Michael, Question: what type of vehicle would Dan like Tesla to make? They don't do it today. For example, a pull-behind RV trailer for Cybertruck with a battery base for backup for extended range
Well,
travelers.
for me, it's an SUV.
Yeah, like a true
I mean,
American-sized
a,
three-row SUV.
a true Tesla like, SU. I mean, look, we've seen like from Ferrari to Maserati. I think that's something, and then maybe as a purist, you wouldn't want to see it. But remember, I'm just talking about the whole like getting to the masses.
Mm.
That's sort of the broader view.
Okay. Yeah. I do wonder, because I have a theory that you tell me if I'm thinking about this incorrectly. I think when Tesla starts getting into the compact car world and they really start hitting that $25,000 to $30,000 price level with sort of the just the amazing ability to get in there and just be one of the, if not the cheapest cost per mile transportation, like private transportation system you can use in the States. I wonder how much of that is going to create so much incredible demand for that type of vehicle that the large SUV type thing is not nearly as needed, and you just allow your Model Ys and your Model X's to carry that load. Like, how do you think about that?
No, I think look, it's going to be a balance, but it just goes back to like they you know they got to be at all price points, but obviously without brand deterioration. Like in other words, like I think it's a balance that they're going to ultimately have to navigate.
Yeah. Yeah, fascinating to see. We'll find out during Investor Day, I guess. We'll see
No,
what
seriously,
happens.
and this has been awesome doing this.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. No, I really appreciate you. Let me get your prediction for Penn State's record this year, bro. What do you think we're at? Penn State's
Oh,
record.
I mean, I think look, their biggest competition is going to be Michigan. I mean, of course, Ohio State, but I think they win the Big Ten this coming year. I mean, that's my view. I think overall in Big Ten, you're going to have Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan, three of the top 6, 7 teams out there. I think, well, especially with UCLA and USC coming to Big Ten in
Yeah.
2024, look, it's a two super conference, right? SEC, Big Ten, but I just do believe Big Ten football is, we're really starting to get to the point. I think Penn State's going to play a huge role there. I think a year from now that they're Big Ten champs.
I agree, man. I agree. I watched the SEC. Like if you watch Alabama last year, they were a good team, but they weren't the usual greatness. And you had a lot of talent.
Well, I
I
think
feel like with
NIL and
the
transfer portal.
exactly that's what I was going to say. Those two things have really created a lot of parity between
Oh
all the
yeah,
teams. It's
100%.
crazy, and I
No,
think Penn State has benefited from that tremendously too. We had
yeah,
I think
great
yeah
recruiting, and look for anyone out there. I know it's a little niche. Also, a huge Penn State wrestling fan. So, as we get into the
yeah.
nationals, come into Oklahoma. If anyone wants to tweet about it or whatever, I'm always up for tweeting about it.
That's awesome. That's when you're talking to a
I
true
know
Penn State fan.
Joey from Tesla Tour is a huge wrestling guy.
And because that's what we're really, football and wrestling. We seem to dominate, and women's volleyball there for a while, but I think I'm not so sure they're dominating nearly as much in women's volleyball. I haven't been
Yeah.
tracking that nearly as much, but
So look, thank you so
yeah,
much.
of course, man. Yeah, thank you so
And
much for
it
having
was
me,
great.
Dan.
And if anyone has questions, just hit me over Twitter, and if it's good, bad, if it whatever it is.
Yeah.
But it's great. Thanks everyone for listening.
Oh, of course, man. Let me pull up your Twitter real quick just to make sure if people have access to this. You can find Dan Ives at Dives
Yeah,
Tech. Let me go ahead
that's
and
that.
share this screen. Yeah, you can find him right here. Dives Tech on Twitter. Dan, thank you so much, man. From another Penn State alum to another one. We are
Penn State. Thank you so
That's right,
much,
man.
everyone.
Thank you, brother.
Okay.
All right, everybody. We'll see you around. Bye-bye.